Zyron 9 had never failed a contract. He was a shadow among the stars, a name whispered in fear by those who held power in the galaxy. His reputation was built on precision, on his ability to eliminate targets without emotion, hesitation, or mistake. He was a master of death, and no species had ever escaped his reach. When he received the contract for Elias Carter, a human diplomat stationed on Earth, he barely gave it a second thought. Humans were insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, a young and relatively weak species compared to the empires that spanned the stars. This was supposed to be an easy job. The assignment came with standard details. Carter was influential among intergalactic negotiators, known for securing treaties that benefited Earth disproportionately. Some powerful faction had decided he was a threat to their control. Zyron 9 didn't concern himself with politics. He worked for the highest bidder, and this contract had come with an impressive sum. He accepted without question. He arrived on Earth under a false identity, blending seamlessly into the background as he always did. The planet was unimpressive: blue skies, sprawling cities, and an atmosphere polluted with both technology and human ambition. Its people bustled about with a sense of urgency, as if constantly running from the inevitable. He observed Carter from a distance, studying his routines, mapping his movements. The diplomat was nothing special, just another fragile human, completely unaware that his time was running out. Zyron 9 prepared for the kill with his usual efficiency. The first attempt would be from a distance, clean, quick, and untraceable. He set up in a high-rise building overlooking the route Carter took each evening, where security was at its weakest. The sniper rifle he carried was not of human design. It was built with advanced targeting systems and antimatter-infused rounds that could penetrate any known material. He had taken down heavily armored warlords, cyber-enhanced enforcers, and beings with regenerative abilities far beyond human comprehension. One shot was all it ever took. He lined up the crosshairs on Carter's head, his finger pressing lightly against the trigger. His breathing slowed. The world around him faded. In that moment, there was only the target, the mission, and the inevitable pull of death. He fired. Nothing happened. The weapon did not recoil, did not release its devastating shot. It remained silent in his hands, as if it had simply chosen not to obey him. Zyron 9 frowned, quickly running diagnostics. Everything appeared normal. He recalibrated, adjusted his stance, and fired again. Silence. A cold sense of unease slithered through him. He had never experienced a weapon malfunction in his career. His equipment was custom-built, designed for absolute reliability. He disengaged, retracting his sniper rifle, and retreated to reassess. That night, he reviewed every possible cause of failure. His rifle was in perfect condition. The positioning had been ideal. The atmosphere on Earth was not interfering with his technology. There was no logical reason for what had happened. And yet, it had happened. The next evening, he adjusted his approach. He positioned himself in a different location, changed his weapon, and ensured no external factors could interfere. He watched Carter move along the expected path, completely unaware of the death meant to claim him. Zyron 9 exhaled slowly, aligned the shot, and fired. This time, the weapon discharged. But instead of striking its mark, the bullet curved, impossibly, unnaturally. It veered off course at the last second, as if the very air had conspired to save Carter. The shot buried itself harmlessly into a wall, and Carter continued walking, untouched, unaware of how close he had been to oblivion. Zyron 9's hands clenched around the rifle. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. Something was interfering. He abandoned his perch and moved to ground level, following Carter at a distance. The diplomat had no visible protection, no energy fields or hidden guards. There were no technological defenses preventing an assassination attempt. And yet, the impossible had happened. His instincts urged caution. Something was wrong. That night, he reviewed the surveillance footage. He watched the exact moment the bullet changed course. There was no external force. No hidden technology. No logical explanation. Carter had not moved. The bullet had. And it had done so with a purpose. Zyron 9 had been in this profession for a long time. He did not believe in myths, in fate, or in unseen forces. But there was something deeply unnatural about what had just occurred. He had killed beings with immense power before, psychics, energy manipulators, creatures whose very existence defied physics. But this was different. He would not leave until he found out why. Xiron 9 moved through the darkened streets with practiced ease, his presence unnoticed among the flow of human life. The city pulsed with artificial lights, neon signs flickering against the glass and steel of towering buildings. He kept a measured pace, following Carter's steps from a distance. The men walked with an air of purpose, seemingly unaware of the assassin shadowing his every move. The sniper rifle had failed him. That alone was enough to put him on edge. But the way the bullet had veered off course, that was something else entirely. Xiron 9 had no patience for anomalies. There was always a reason. Always a pattern. He would find it. He adjusted the grip on the small, concealed energy blade at his side. A close-range approach was riskier but necessary. He had studied Carter's patterns, memorized his schedule. The diplomat often took the same route home, avoiding heavily populated areas when possible. He was a man who valued routine, and routine made for an easy kill. Xiron 9 moved ahead, navigating the side streets until he reached the intersection Carter would pass through. He positioned himself in the shadows of a narrow alley, his figure blending seamlessly into the darkness. The moment the human stepped within reach, he would strike, silent, efficient, absolute. The footsteps drew closer. Carter's face came into view under the glow of a nearby street lamp. Xiron 9 exhaled slowly, his muscles coiling like a spring as he prepared to lunge. Then something shifted. A wave of unease washed over him. It was subtle at first, a whisper at the edges of his senses. Then it grew, an invisible pressure pressing down on him, thick and suffocating. His limbs, once ready to strike, hesitated for the first time in his existence. The feeling was unlike anything he had encountered before. It was not fear. Xiron 9 did not feel fear. This was something deeper, something ancient. The kind of force that made even the most ruthless killers pause. Carter passed within arm's reach, his expression calm, unaware. The opportunity was perfect. The assassin's fingers twitched against the hilt of his blade. He could not move. The realization struck him like a physical blow. His body refused to obey. The command to attack, the instinct honed over years of killing, all of it was paralyzed by something he could neither see nor understand. Carter continued walking, his back now turned to the assassin. Xiron 9 ground his teeth, forcing every ounce of his will into action. His hand gripped the knife, his muscles screamed for release, but the moment he tried to step forward, the world shifted. For a split second, the alley was gone. The street was gone. Everything around him dissolved into an infinite void, a vast and empty expanse that stretched beyond comprehension. He was nowhere. He was nothing. Then it snapped back. The city returned. The neon lights flickered, the distant hum of traffic filled the night air, and Carter was gone, his footsteps already fading into the distance. Xiron 9 staggered backward, pressing a hand against the wall for stability. His breathing was steady, but his mind reeled from the impossible. He had fought creatures capable of bending time, faced species that could phase through dimensions, but never, never, had he been frozen in place against his will. His hands curled into fists. This was not coincidence. This was not a failing of his own body. Something had intervened. Something had protected Carter. And that meant someone, something, had noticed him. The assassin did not retreat. He had no intention of abandoning the contract. But he needed to reassess. He needed to understand what force had just stopped him. He turned sharply and disappeared into the shadows, his mind racing with the only question that mattered. Who, or what, was guarding the human? Xiron 9 moved swiftly through the city, his mind calculating every possible explanation for what had happened. He had encountered advanced security systems, kinetic force fields, and psychic defenses before. But this was something different. There had been no barriers, no visible interference, only the overwhelming, paralyzing presence that had bound him in place. He had never experienced anything like it. The assassin retreated to the safe house he had secured upon his arrival. It was a nondescript apartment in a rundown part of the city, chosen for its isolation. No surveillance, no human neighbors who would notice anything unusual. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the hollow displays floating above his wrist device. He activated a deep scan diagnostic, running an analysis of his own vitals and neural systems. The results came back flawless. His body had not been compromised. There were no foreign agents, no signs of external tampering. Whatever had stopped him had not affected his biology or technology. It had simply been. He leaned back, his fingers tapping against the table. There was an answer, but he was missing it. If this were a mere security measure, he could find a way around it. If it were an energy field, he could counter it. But this was not something that could be fought with tactics. It had reached beyond his weapons, beyond his instincts. The thought sent a slow burn of irritation through him. He did not tolerate failure. And yet, he had stood there, frozen, while his target walked away unscathed. His jaw tightened. He needed information. Xiron 9 accessed the interstellar black markets, scanning through records that stretched beyond human history. The contract had not specified why Carter was a target. But perhaps, buried somewhere in the archives of illegal intelligence networks, there was an answer. He entered the highest security databases, bypassing firewalls designed to keep out even the most advanced operatives. Names scrolled across his screen, classified files containing histories of individuals who had disrupted galactic power structures. Carter's name appeared, but the information was fragmented. There was nothing unusual about his early life, just another Earthborn diplomat. But then the records changed. His name appeared in restricted files, connected to incidents that had no clear explanation. Events where humans had survived situations that should have annihilated them. Disasters that had stopped at the last moment. Negotiations where the opposing side had simply given up. Xiron 9 narrowed his eyes. This was no coincidence. A new search command pulled up deeper reports, old myths buried in the whispers of classified intelligence. Mentions of unseen guardians. Events throughout human history where assassins, conquerors, and invaders had all faced unexplained failures. Entire fleets had vanished near Earth. High-profile targets had been declared dead, only for their killers to disappear without a trace. And now, he was on that list. A cold realization settled over him. Someone, or something, was watching. And he was no longer the hunter. The sound of static crackled through his communication system, an impossibility since it was encrypted beyond interference. Then, a voice, calm, distant, and impossibly deep, spoke directly into his mind. Leave the human alone. Xiron 9's breath did not hitch, but his muscles coiled. He had not activated any channels. No signal had been received. The voice was not coming from any external source. It was inside him. The lights flickered. The room darkened. A shadow moved in the corner, though no figure stood there. The very air seemed to press in around him. Something was here. He rose slowly, his movements calculated. He had fought enemies in every known star system, but this was unlike any presence he had encountered. It did not radiate aggression. It did not threaten him. It simply was. His fingers tightened around the handle of his blade. The voice returned. You were warned. The hollow displays died. The walls trembled. Then, in the blink of an eye, the presence vanished, leaving only silence behind. Xiron 9 remained motionless for a long moment. His instincts screamed at him, this was not a battle he could win. But he was not leaving. Not yet. Xiron 9 had survived wars, outmaneuvered the deadliest hunters in the galaxy, and executed contracts that no other assassin dared to accept. He had faced adversaries who could tear through time, creatures that existed between dimensions, and warlords who had ruled for centuries. And yet, none of them had made him hesitate. Now, as he sat in the dimly lit safe house, reviewing the fragments of information he had gathered, he felt something he could not define. It was not fear. Fear was for those who did not understand the game. This was something different, an awareness that he was no longer the one in control. The presence that had spoken to him was gone, but its warning lingered like an echo. It had reached him without a signal, overridden his encrypted systems, and made itself known without revealing a form. That meant it was more than just a simple guardian. It was something else entirely. He leaned forward, running his fingers over the cold metal of his blade. The contract was still open, but he had been given a choice, a warning unlike any he had received before. Most targets had defenses that could be circumvented. But this was not a defense. This was something watching over Carter, something ancient and unseen. But everything had a weakness. Xiron 9 had encountered civilizations that thought themselves invincible, beings that claimed to be gods. He had studied their patterns, learned their flaws, and dismantled them piece by piece. If something was protecting Carter, it could be studied. It could be tested. He stood, his mind made up. If something wanted to keep Carter alive, then he would make it react. The next evening, Xiron 9 followed Carter through the city once again, but this time, he was not aiming to kill. He moved with the deliberate pace of a predator, staying just beyond the human's awareness. His goal was not to strike, but to draw out the force that had stopped him before. Carter moved as he always did, unbothered, unaware. The streets were alive with the hum of human life, but Xiron 9 filtered it all out. His focus was absolute. He reached into his belt and activated a device, an energy disruptor capable of forcing an immediate reaction from any unseen force. It sent out a silent pulse, invisible to human eyes but detectable to anything operating outside the normal spectrum of existence. Nothing happened. Xiron 9 exhaled slowly. He adjusted the frequency, releasing another pulse. Still nothing. Carter walked ahead, oblivious, disappearing around a corner. Xiron 9 followed, stepping into the narrow alley. And the world vanished. The buildings, the sky, even the ground beneath his feet, gone. He was nowhere. A vast, empty void stretched before him, endless and silent. It was neither cold nor warm, neither light nor dark. He had no sensation of weight, no sense of time. He was simply there. Then, a presence. It did not appear in any visible form, but he felt it, immense and incomprehensible. It was not a mind he could analyze, not a force he could quantify. It was something that existed beyond logic. The voice returned, resonating through his consciousness like 1,000 whispers speaking in unison. You still do not understand. Xiron 9 clenched his jaw, his muscles tensing even though there was no battlefield here, no weapon he could wield. Humans are protected. The assassin did not speak, but his thoughts sharpened like a blade. By what? For the first time, there was silence. As if the presence itself did not wish to answer. Then, the voice returned, softer this time. You are out of your depth, assassin. You were given a warning. He was not meant to die by your hands. Xiron 9 narrowed his eyes. Then by whose hands? The void trembled. The presence did not answer. Instead, the world snapped back into place. He was standing in the alley again, the city around him unchanged. The distant hum of human life continued as if nothing had happened. But Carter was gone. Xiron 9 remained motionless for a long moment. The contract was no longer just a job. It was a puzzle. And he had never left a puzzle unsolved. Xiron 9 did not leave the alley immediately. He stood in place, his senses sharp, scanning every inch of his surroundings. The city moved on as if nothing had happened, but he knew better. He had just been somewhere, something had taken him out of reality and placed him back without explanation. The force protecting Carter was unlike anything he had encountered before. It did not act with brute strength, did not deploy armies or technology. It simply was, existing outside the boundaries of logic, intervening only when necessary, and always remaining unseen. This was not a shield. This was not a defense. It was something older, something deeper. Something woven into the very fabric of reality. For the first time in his career, Xiron 9 acknowledged the truth: he could not win. The assassin was a master of his craft. He had eliminated beings that defied the laws of physics, destroyed entities that claimed to be gods, and evaded traps set by entire civilizations. But this was different. There was no flaw to exploit, no weakness to uncover. There was no enemy in the traditional sense, only a force that would never allow Carter to die by his hands. And he had been warned. He did not take warnings lightly, nor did he ignore them. He had no illusions of invincibility. If this presence had wanted him gone, he would have never returned from that void. It had given him a chance to walk away, and he knew better than to refuse twice. Without hesitation, he activated his secure communicator. The encrypted signal connected to his employer, an unknown entity that had provided the contract, someone powerful enough to afford his services but cowardly enough to remain hidden. A distorted voice answered, static laced through the transmission. Report. Zyron 9's voice was calm, but his words were absolute. Contract is void. Silence. Then, the voice sharpened. That is not your decision to make. Zyron 9's fingers hovered over the communicator, his patience thin. You don't understand. The target is untouchable. Not by security, not by technology. Something else is protecting him. A pause. Then, a slow, measured response. Explain. He had no explanation. No words could define what had happened. But he had seen enough to know that pursuing this further would only lead to his own demise. You don't want to push this. Another silence, but this time, the voice on the other end did not argue. There was a hesitation, an uncertainty that had not been there before. Whoever had issued this contract knew more than they had shared. Finally, the voice spoke again. Understood. The line cut out. The contract was officially closed. Zyron 9 deactivated the communicator and exhaled slowly. The decision had been made. There was nothing left for him here. The next morning, Elias Carter entered his office, unaware of how close death had come to him in the past few days. He sipped his coffee, scanned the latest diplomatic reports, and continued his work as if nothing had changed. But in the shadows of the galaxy, something had noticed him. Something had ensured that no harm would come to him. And somewhere far away, an assassin known as Zyron 9 boarded his ship, leaving Earth behind. For the first time in his life, he had walked away from a mission. Not out of failure. Not out of fear. But because, for the first time, he had come across something that could not be killed. And that was a truth even he could not ignore.